Senator Lazarus. Senator Xenophon.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. And what a relief it is to hear from Senator Lazarus not say those words, Mr President or Mr Acting Deputy President. This is not my first speech, and I'm sure that Senator Lambie will be relieved not to have to say that after her first speech later today, and I wish her well in respect of that. I will speak to this bill and say that I cannot support it. I'll outline those reasons, but I think it's fair to say, after Senator Lazarus outlined his party's position very well, that insofar as this bill relates to the job market, in the sense that if the job market is contracted, if there are fewer jobs out there, it does make a difference, as Senator Lazarus has said. I am concerned that yesterday, with the mining tax repeal, there were also repealed benefits to small businesses in terms of accelerated write-offs. And I just did a media conference not so long ago with Peter Strong, the CEO of the Council of Small Business of Australia, and he had genuine concerns about the chaos that will cause and confusion for small businesses. Some who've claimed the write-off thinking they could because of the uncertainty, and now will have to pay that back, or will now have to really plan differently because it's disrupted their business plan. And if you accept that the driver of employment growth in this country, one of the biggest drivers, is the small business sector, then that is something that really concerns me, and that is the problem when you rush legislation through. And that is not a— I'm not having a go at Senator Lazarus, who I have a lot of regard for. What? No, I'm saying that if you rush things through and don't have appropriate debate, and it happened in the previous parliament with the ALP government and the Greens with the gag on many occasions, this is what happens. You end up with some lousy policy outcomes. And can I direct this to the Liberal Party of Australia? Their great founder, Sir Robert Menzies, back in 1942 spoke of the forgotten people, including the small businesses of this country. Well, I reckon that small business in the 21st century Liberal Party have been forgotten by this government with the changes that were announced yesterday. And I say that with more sorrow than anger, and direct that to the Leader of the government in the Senate, Senator Betts, who I do actually have a lot of regard for. Now let's go to this particular bill. Serious failures can occur when a job seeker refuses a suitable job offer without a valid reason or persistently fails to comply with participation or activity requirements. The penalty is an 8-week non-payment period. These are penalties that the former government put in place. Under the current law, introduced under the Rudd governments, there is an option to undertake a participation requirement similar to work experience instead of the non-payment. Under the current law, the Secretary of the Department has a discretion to waive the penalty in certain circumstances, for example, if it would cause severe financial hardship or if the person is unable to undertake the participation option. This bill removes that discretion where a job seeker has refused or failed to accept an offer of suitable employment. The bill also removes further discretion where the Secretary may end the 8-week penalty early. The government has also, and that is a case where there has been compliance. For whatever reason, if that person makes good, there can be compliance and there can be that discretion exercised by the Secretary. The government also introduced regulations relating to the matters the Secretary must consider when determining whether a job seeker has reasonable excuse for failing to meet the participation requirements. And we're talking about reasonable excuse. This was disallowed by the Senate last week, and I supported that. But as it stood, the instrument meant that the Secretary will no longer need to consider, firstly, that the person did not have access to safe, secure and adequate housing, or that they were using emergency or shelter accommodation. Secondly, the literacy and language skills of the person. Thirdly, that the person was subject to criminal violence, including domestic violence. Fourthly, that the person was affected by the death of a close family member at the time. And fifthly, if the person had previously been released from prison. That is why I commend the work of Senator Rachel Siewert in her advocacy in relation to this. That is why I supported Senator Cameron's motion to disallow, and I voted along with the Palmer United Party because it was the right thing to do in the context of that. Research from the Social Policy Research Centre, the SPRC, indicates that the 8-week non-payment period is more likely to impact on people who are already struggling. The financial strain can seriously affect access to safe and secure housing, with data from the Department of Education, Employment and Workplace Relations in 2008 showing that the approximately 15% of people subject to the non-payment period lost their accommodation. A further 50% experience difficulty in paying their rent and were put at risk of homelessness. While there needs to be compliance measures in place for those that genuinely aren't doing the right thing, for those that genuinely aren't making an effort to find work, people should still be treated humanely and with dignity and respect. There are serious concerns that the measure in this bill will have a harmful impact on people who are already struggling. And my fear, and I think it's reflected in the comments of Senator Lazarus, for instance, is that this will just drive, if this bill is passed, it will drive more people into crime, into violence, in order to survive, and that is not what I think we should be doing as a society. The impact of the non-payment period may also establish a vicious cycle where job seekers are penalised and then, in such a bad financial position, they are more vulnerable to further breaches. There is no case for changing the current system, and certainly, if there is any case, certainly not in this way. The issues that need to be brought in context, and Senator Lazarus touched on the issue of jobs in regional Queensland. Well, guess what, Senator Lazarus? Not only do I agree with you, but there's problems in the suburbs of Adelaide with jobs, because the decision by General Motors Holden to leave its manufacturing plant, to leave manufacturing towards the end of 2017, will have a huge impact on the automotive supply chain, not just in South Australia but in Victoria as well. There are 33,000 direct jobs in the automotive component sector, another 12,000 or so in the original automotive manufacturers, who will all be departing by the end of 2017, sadly and tragically. And there are other tiers of that sector. There is a significant multiplier effect, estimated upwards of 150 to 200,000 jobs that are relying on that sector. There will be a potential catastrophic collapse of employment in South Australia and in Victoria if we do not ensure that there is appropriate transition funding. And that is why I look forward to work. I've worked with Senator Ricky Muir on this and with Senator John Madigan, Senator Di Natale as well from the Australian Greens. We need to ensure that the automotive transformation scheme, that the funding that was butchered, effectively $900 million, and in particular $500 million over the next 3 critical calendar years, is maintained, that the criteria for that funding is altered so that it gives real hope for manufacturing. We're not talking about corporate welfare, we're talking about letting those businesses transition to other businesses, whether it's in the mining sector, in the renewable energy space, or even, hopefully, that we can build another car, a locally made car here, either from another country where it's assembled here or from the ground up. And I have been speaking to people about that in my home state and interstate, and we need to ensure that that funding is in place. Just as the dairy industry was provided with significant funding to transition as a result of the deregulation a number of years ago, there's a similar concept there. And I must say, the statement of the Treasurer, of Mr Hockey, when he said last year, effectively taunted Holden, are you going to stay or are you going to go? I just found that reckless and irresponsible, and I say that with great sadness because I have a lot of time for Mr Hockey at a personal level, but I think that that statement was reckless and irresponsible. It basically was giving a finger to General Motors headquarters in Detroit, and there is going to be a huge chasm that needs to be filled in terms of those jobs. So we need to consider this piece of legislation in the context of a weakening job market. Our manufacturing sector is collapsing. Our farming sector is struggling for a whole range of reasons, and Senator Lazarus touched on it yesterday. Food labelling laws, the duopoly, a whole range of other measures. And I heard today that Coles is retrenching several hundred people, which is sad. I'll criticise Coles for their market share and some of their practices, but I do say that they are a significant employer and a good employer from the people I've spoken to, as is Woolworths. So my complaint is not the people that run it. My complaint is their level of market share and the consequences that flow on from that. So, Mr Acting Deputy President, I cannot support this legislation, particularly in the context of a weakening job market. If there are other ways to deal with those who genuinely aren't seeking employment, if there are other ways to deal with that, we should. And having said that, Mr Acting Deputy President, I know that you and others in the Labor movement have spent a lot of effort and energy attacking me on the issue of penalty rates, for which I will not apologise. I believe that if you want to stimulate employment in this country, to open up the job market, then you are not exploiting particularly young people if you limit penalty rates to, say, 25% on weekends, the casual loading, because there are many businesses across this country that have actually shut down on weekends, that have cut back their hours because it is not economic for them to survive. And I defy anyone to say that you are exploiting a casual worker who is getting 25% above the award on a weekend for a small business with 20 employees or less, which makes up the backbone of jobs in this country. So that is a debate that we need to have. But in your own home state, Mr Acting Deputy President, there are tourism areas all around your state in wonderful Western Australia that cannot be open on weekends because of penalty rates. And that, to me, does not make any sense if you're destroying those job opportunities. So, unlike Senator Day, and I wish him well with his first speech, his real first speech today, I don't actually support reducing the minimum wage. I support the award system, but I do not support the current system of penalty rates, which has been a job killer for young people, which has been a heavy burden on small businesses across this country, and that is something that needs to be considered in the context of the employment market in this nation.